Hello dolls, and welcome back to Vlogmas Day 7. Welcome to another episode of my Muse series. Today I want to speak about a woman whose face you've definitely seen, but whose story you probably don't know. A girl whose face became an emblem of the 1960s, but her story is largely untold. Welcome to Penelope Tree, a portrait in time. Because this is another Vlogmas episode, I am giving away another little something, and today's advent calendar gift is this beautiful tooled vintage purse. It's a little smaller, but I do love it. It's such a sweet little piece. It holds all the necessities and it's just in really great conditions. So if you want to enter the giveaway, make sure to stay until the end. But now, without any more talking, let me tell you about the life of Penelope Tree. At first, no one quite knew what to make of her face. It wasn't pretty in the way the time had been trained to recognize beauty. It was too watchful, too intense, too unafraid. Her eyes did not offer comfort, they asked questions. When people first looked at Penelope Tree, they didn't see a girl longing to be a model. They saw an interruption, a challenge to everything fashion had been quietly agreeing upon. Something that didn't politely belong, and yet could not be looked away from. Something that had arrived early or late or sideways, and in doing so changed the shape of what was about to come next. History likes its women simple. It takes the sharp, complex edges of real lives and presses them into clean, usable shapes. Model, muse, icon, beauty. But Penelope Tree refused simplicity without ever having to declare it. She walked through life like an unanswered question, and the camera, sensing this, followed her. She looked less like an invention of fashion and more like a disruption inside it, as if an entirely new idea of beauty had accidentally walked onto the set. There is something unsettling about the photographs, not in a dark way, in a conscious one, as if she is slightly ahead of time, watching the world catch up to a version of itself she already understood. The stillness, the silence, the space she carried around her, it wasn't absence, it was gravity. Most stories of the 1960s are told in color, sound, and spectacle, but Penelope's story is told in glances, pauses, and the tension between what is seen and what is felt. She didn't just model clothes, she altered the language of looking, and once the world had learned to see through her, it could never go back to the way it had seen before. Chapter 1. A Child of Two Worlds. Penelope Tree was born on December 2nd, 1949 in New York City, into a world that looked gilded from the outside but was complicated within. Her father, Ronald Tree, was a British journalist and politician, and later a conservative member of parliament, educated, formal, and shaped by European systems of order and power. Her mother, Marietta Peabody Tree, was quintessentially American, wealthy, politically engaged, socially visible, and deeply involved in art, education, and activism. Through her mother, Penelope was connected to one of America's most famous family dynasty, and through her father, the cold polish of British politics and aristocratic tradition. From the very beginning, her life was lived in between two worlds. She grew up moving between continents, cultures, expectations, between spacious Manhattan apartments, European boarding schools, and English country houses where conversations were measured and emotions often unspoken. Privilege was presented everywhere, but something essential was missing. Her ease, her world was beautiful, but not warm. As a child, she was quiet, introspective, more observer than participant. She has recalled feeling separate, even then, as if she was watching her own life from a small distance. Books became a refuge. There was already a kind of internal world forming, separate from ballroom dinners and adult conversations. At 13, Penelope was photographed by Diane Arbus. The shoot was not intended as an entry into modeling, but it marked the first time her appearance was publicly recognized as distinctive. Her family was alarmed, not impressed. Modeling was considered frivolous, even inappropriate. Legal actions were threatened if it continued. In their world, a daughter's future was meant to move in a more respectable direction, but the image already existed, and once the camera saw her, it couldn't look away. There was, even then, a sense that Penelope did not fit completely into the life that was planned and laid out for her. Physically, she did not resemble the soft, symmetrical ideas of the 1950s. Her face was too round and her eyes were too big, heavy lashed eyes that didn't seem to pose but to examine. She sported a long fringe that often fell into her eyesight like a curtain between her and the world. She didn't look ornamental, she looked aware. It is so interesting to me how beauty ideals have changed over the time, because I feel like nowadays, and this is something that started in the 60s, we like a unique kind of beautiful. But if you look at the 50s, 40s, the time before that, beauty was a very narrow space. If you look at the epitome of beauty in the 50s and 40s, that is mostly Hollywood actresses and models, and they all kind of look the same. And I don't want to say that they weren't beautiful, but I do understand how a lot of these women, because this is something that comes up in a couple of these Muses episodes, the fact that they grew up with the thought that only one thing was beautiful and they weren't. And my heart breaks for them. It's interesting because all of these girls went on to largely defy what was beautiful in the decade that followed. It's also so interesting to me because Penelope could have had this very comfortable upper class life. She could have just married rich and called it a day, but she really wanted to live a different kind of life from early on. By the early 1960s, youth culture was beginning to crack open the old world. Music was changing, silhouettes were shortening, women were beginning to reject inherited roles. Somewhere between the expectations of her family and the shifting rhythm of the time, Penelope stood at a crossroads she did not consciously choose, yet seemed inevitably made for. The world she had been born into was beginning to dissolve, and the world that was coming next was, unknowingly, waiting for a face just like hers. Chapter 2: When the World Turned Its Head. Penelope's real breakthrough came at the height of the 1960s, in a London that was redefining youth, beauty, and power almost overnight. Music, fashion, photography, and films were colliding, and the city was becoming a stage for something entirely new. Traditional ideas of refinement were being replaced by rebellion, individuality, and risk. It was in this atmosphere of disruption that Penelope, still in her mid-teens, stepped into the public view. At just 16, she was scouted at the now legendary Black and White Ball hosted by Truman Capote in New York, a gathering of writers, artists, socialites, and cultural power players that blurred the lines between high society and avant-garde. The ball was meant to celebrate Truman Capote's success, but it also became a spectacle, and a crossroad moment for everyone who attended. Quote, "I was invited to Truman Capote's Black and White Ball at the Plaza Hotel in New York in 1966. The clothes were fantastic. It was a great spectacle. For Penelope, it marked the unofficial beginning of her modeling career, and the moment international eyes began to follow her. Soon after, her path led to London, the heartbeat of the new creative revolution. It was there at 17 that she met David Bailey. Quote, "This was my first time sitting with David Bailey. I was 17. As soon as I walked into the room, I felt electrically connected. This incredible mix of emotions, fear and attraction. The connection between them would define both her life and her image. David Bailey was already a central figure in the transformation of fashion photography, and he did not treat her like a traditional model. Instead, he amplified the intensity she naturally carried. His camera didn't soften her features, it sharpened them and celebrated them. Through his lens, her different face became a statement, beautiful, intelligent, confrontational, and utterly modern." David Bailey also comes up in a lot of these episodes because he largely shaped fashion photography in the 1960s in Europe, and he's also very intertwined with the lives of these young, beautiful girls because he definitely had a thing for them. He was with Jean Shrimpton, he was with Penelope. He's also been connected to several other girls that I'm going to talk about in this series. And I've made a video all about him, which I'm just going to link here, because the way that he visually shot these girls is very different to how pictures were taken in the 50s. And that is also what made them so modern. So I think David Bailey is very largely responsible for the fact that all these girls had their big break, because he just offered something completely new for models, and it really worked with all of these beautiful girls. Penelope soon became a fixture of London's inner creative circle. She lived for a time in Primrose Hill, surrounded by musicians, photographers, designers, and artists who were shaping the visual identity of the decade. She wasn't simply part of the fashion scene, she became one of its faces. Her presence represented the departure from polished glamour and a move towards something more cerebral and raw. Despite early skepticism from parts of the industry, major figures in fashion quickly recognized her power. Quote, "Diana Vreeland and Richard Avedon had the most impact on my career, because they championed me right from the beginning when most people in the industry thought I looked like a freak. Diane Vreeland, as the editor of Vogue, was known for seeking out what was unconventional, and Avedon, with his sharp, psychological approach to photography, understood the emotional depth behind Penelope's face. With their support, she became part of a new visual language, one that valued intensity, individuality, and confrontation over softness and conformity." But her impact reached beyond fashion. Musicians noticed her, artists noticed her. She was part of a cultural moment in which the boundaries between discipline were dissolving. When asked to describe her in just 3 words, John Lennon reportedly said, "Hot, hot, hot, smart, smart, smart." It was a comment that reflected both her physical presence and the intelligence that people sensed beneath it. Penelope Tree wasn't just modeling clothes, she was embodying the restlessness, curiosity, and defiance of an entire generation. By the late 1960s, her image had become inseparable from the visual mythology of the era. She was a living marker of change, proof that beauty did not longer have to follow a certain type to be powerful. Chapter 3, In Rooms Made of Light. By the late 1960s, Penelope Tree's face had become impossible to ignore. It appeared in magazines, on studio walls, in design rooms, and on mood boards. But more than that, it began to influence the way people saw. In an industry still dominated by soft glamour and polished perfection, her sharp features and intensity felt almost confrontational, a break from everything that had come before. She was not styled to be sweet, she was styled to be seen. Photographers did not try to smooth her edges or soften her presence. Instead, they leaned into it. Her heavy fringe, the severity of her lines, the weight of her gaze, these were no longer flaws to be corrected. These were the point. She embodied a new type of beauty, cooler, more intellectual, slightly distant, a beauty that didn't comfort, but asked for attention. Designers began to dress her as if she was a concept rather than a body. Clothes on Penelope didn't simply flatter, they expressed an idea. She became less of a mannequin and more a living reference image, a silhouette others tried to echo, a mood others tried to capture. She later described this period as a time where she was, quote, a teenager and vulnerable, very insecure and introverted. That contradiction between the woman the world projected onto her and the girl that she still felt she was became part of the tensions that were captured in her photographs. It can be seen in the way that she rarely smiles, in the childlike stance of her posture, in the feeling that she is somewhere else entirely, even when she's in center frame. She was becoming a symbol, whether she wanted that or not. This is something I was fascinated by very early on when I saw pictures of Penelope Tree. She always looks like in her mind she's somewhere else. And these pictures are so great. And I think part of what makes them so great is because of the fact that she has this kind of feeling of I'm somewhere else. It makes it feel very personal that she's captured in a moment like that. In a decade so obsessed with modernity, Penelope Tree embodied exactly that. By the end of the decade, she was no longer simply a model moving through London. She had become one of the decade's most visual signatures, a figure people recognized, even if they did not yet fully understand why. And it was within this strange new reality, where she was both everywhere and strangely unknown, that the next, more complicated chapter of her life began. As said, for me, she's kind of the embodiment of the girl that you know her face, you've seen her so much, but I doubt that most people know her name. She's one of those girls from the 60s, and there are a couple whose faces were everywhere, but their stories were largely unknown. Chapter 4, The Bailey Years. The same intensity that had once propelled Penelope Tree into the center of the 1960s began in the early 1970s to turn inward. The fashion world is merciless in its devotion to youth and perfection, and when Penelope began to suffer from late-onset acne, withdrew its gaze. Photographers hesitated, jobs disappeared, runaways and studios that had once felt inevitable began to feel distant, almost hostile. What had once been framed as different was now recast as imperfect. Quote, I went from being sought after to being shunned because nobody could bear to talk about the way I looked. The silence that followed was almost more brutal than open rejection. No explanations, just absence. The phone stopped ringing, the invitations ended, and an industry that had once built her image now refused to acknowledge her at all. At the center of this very unraveling was her relationship with David Bailey. What had begun as creative electricity and deep attraction had grown complicated over time, layered with imbalance, dependence, and emotional intensity. He had not only been her partner, but also her maker, her ally, her doorway into another world that both adored her and devoured her. To lose him meant more than heartbreak. It meant losing the axis around which her life had turned for nearly a decade. Their relationship ended in 1974, and she left England and went to Australia, a move that seemed like an escape at first, but slowly turned into exile. Away from the environment that had once defined her, she began to sink into a depression that was heavy and consuming. The identity she had once worn so effortlessly, model, icon, even muse, had vanished, and there was nothing immediately in its place. Quote, "Everything I held dear disappeared. I was in love with Bailey, but it was more than love. He was the center of my gravity, and I had to work hard to get it back." Her words reveal the depth of that dependence, not just emotional but existential. For a girl who had always lived in an orbit around powerful adults, photographers, cultural figures, and institutions, suddenly having no center at all was truly terrifying. But instead of giving up, Penelope began therapy. She searched for grounding, for something that had nothing to do with image or approval. She took dance classes, something she later joked she was terrible at, a group class taught by Arlene Phillips. The act of moving her body, not for the camera, but simply for herself, became part of her recovery. This is something that comes up every now and then. The idea that someone who is so known for being beautiful is rarely known for something else. Usually, these women, especially if you're just a face, and this was a time where the model, this wasn't about her personality. It's not like nowadays where these models are also cast in fashion campaigns and advertisement campaigns that are also kind of centered around who this person is. This was a time where the model was simply someone to look at. And I think Penelope at some point was just over the fact that people only saw her for her beauty. No one saw her for anything else. And it almost seemed like no one cared what else she had to offer. But eventually, she found Buddhism. The teachings offered her a way to detach from the obsessive focus on appearance, recognition, and loss. She rejected the illusion she had lived inside for so long, particularly the illusion that was tied to her face, body, and the gaze of others. Quote, "When I was younger, I was obsessed with appearance. In my 40s, I encountered Buddhism. Now I don't look in the mirror a lot. I don't see the point." It wasn't fame that had been taken from her, it was obsession, and in losing it, she began to discover a different kind of freedom. A life stripped back, a self no longer filtered through a lens. This period did not return her to the world, it returned her to herself. Chapter 5, In the Hands of Ordinary Time. After her withdrawal from the fashion world, Penelope's life took a more private and domestic direction. One of the most significant changes in this period was becoming a mother, something she approached with both fear and uncertainty. Quote, "Babies frightened me, and I was scared all the way through pregnancy. Then this being emerged, and I felt the most extraordinary rush of love that has ever changed, only becoming stronger with time." Motherhood became something that truly helped her heal. It shifted her priorities away from appearance, work, and public recognition, and towards care, responsibility, and emotional stability. Unlike the instability she had experienced in the fashion industry, her role as mother provided consistency and meaning. In later years, she also actively became involved in charity work. Through the organization Lotus Outreach, she focused on improving access to education and support for vulnerable girls and young women. The organization's project included work in Cambodia, India, Brazil, Guatemala, and the south side of Chicago. Her involvement reflected a long-term commitment to issues of inequality, particularly those affecting girls and women in disadvantaged communities. And she started writing. Not a biography, but a novel. Her novel, Piece of My Heart, drew on her experiences inside the fashion industry, not as a glittering memoir, but as a psychological exploration of image, identity, and damage. I have read this book, and it is phenomenal because it's the story of a young model in the 60s. It's essentially kind of her story, but not too closely related, but you can definitely feel that this was written by someone who knows what they're talking about. And what this book did for me in understanding her was the kind of idea that the whole world can look at you and you can still feel like you're not enough. You can still struggle with things, and you can also love being that picture for everyone. You can love your career and still hate the fact that people only see you for what you look like and not for who you are. So honestly, it's a great novel, and if you've not read it yet, I would highly encourage you to do so. Quote, "What aging has given me is a strong desire to make the most out of the life I have now, and to see beyond forms and appearances, one of the themes and Piece of My Heart. Age did not bring her nostalgia, it brought her clarity." Chapter 6, Where the Light Softened. Today, Penelope Tree lives in rural Sussex, away from the fashion and media environments that once defined her public life. She is surrounded by open countryside and animals, and her day-to-day life is shaped by routine, nature, and privacy, rather than public attention. This represents a clear contrast to the decades when her face was widely recognized in the fashion industry. This distance from the industry has been intentional. Quote, "I like to live a life that doesn't depend on image or material possession or anyone else other than myself." Her home life is now completely separate from the world in which she first became known, including the studios, fashion houses, social events, and publications that shaped her early career. She has chosen an environment that allows for independence and a slower, more self-directed way of living. Her lifestyle today reflects a clear rejection of the idea that relevance or success must be connected to visibility or fame. At the same time, her image has reimagined part of fashion and cultural history. Her photographs continue to appear in archives, exhibitions, and retrospectives of the 1960s and 70s. She is frequently referenced in discussions about changing standards of beauty and the development of more unconventional and intellectual styles in modeling. For many, she remains a defining visual figure of the swinging 60s, not because she represented fantasy, but because she represented a turning point. Her legacy can be understood on both a cultural and personal level. On a cultural level, she's remembered as one of the most recognizable and unconventional faces of her time. She contributed to a wider shift in fashion and photography, in which individuality and intensity became more valued than traditional beauty. Her career also served as an example of the fashion industry's volatility and how it can reject people it once adored. On a personal level, her life reflects a long process of distancing herself from external validation. Over time, she moved away from defining herself through appearance or public recognition and focused instead on inner stability, family, charity work, and personal values. She does not reject her past, but she does not allow it to dominate her presence. To her, it feels like a lifetime away. Quote, "I like not feeling like I'm missing out." Penelope Tree's story is not only the story of a well-known model, it is the story of a young woman who was elevated into public visibility and later chose a path that moved away from it. Her life illustrates how easy a person can become a symbol in popular culture and how difficult it can be to establish a sense of identity once the visibility fades. In her case, this transition was not marked by a return to fame or attempt to recreate her past. Instead, it was shaped by withdrawal, reflection, and conscious choice. She did not attempt to reclaim her former status. She chose to build a life that was separate from the image that had once defined her. The significance of her story lies not only in the images that remain from her time in the fashion world, but also in the decades that followed. These years were defined by family, charitable work, spiritual exploration, and private living. They demonstrate that a life does not lose its meaning once public attention disappears. Penelope Tree's legacy, therefore, is not only visual, it is personal. It is rooted in the way she redefined what mattered to her and how she chose to live when she was no longer being watched. Penelope Tree's story is the story of the woman behind the face that was seen, reproduced, and replicated over and over again. The face that had become such a big part of the identity of the 1960s that no one asked who the girl was. But the girl behind the face chose a life that belonged fully to herself. So that brings me to the end of today's video, the end of Penelope Tree's life story. I adore her. As said, she's one of these girls I came across early on when I fell in love with the 60s because her face was truly everywhere. And I started to look into who she was and had a little bit of a hard time finding anything because I feel like she's kind of largely forgotten about at this point, and I do think she wants it that way. I don't think she's sad about the fact, but I also want to bring her story out here because, as said, she's a face you see everywhere, and I do believe that we should know her story because it's a story of an incredible woman. But yeah, I would love to know what you think. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you think about Penelope and if you knew anything about her, and also if you've seen her face, because I bet you a lot of you have seen her face and did not know her story. Now for the giveaway. If you want to enter, all you have to do is be subscribed, give this video a thumbs up. I will post all the winners on December 26th. You can enter every single day for every single prize. Just know that if you've already won something, I'm gonna take your name out of the hat just because I want to make as many people happy as possible. But yeah, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I would love you to give it a thumbs up and maybe even share it with a friend. It supports me, it supports the channel, and it would truly mean the world. I hope you have a beautiful day. Go out, enjoy the sunshine, take yourself some time to focus on you and your mental health today, and I will see you tomorrow with the next video. Bye, dolls!